Alrighty, everyone. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Before we begin, I want to run through a few items. If you called into the teleconference, please be aware that you have been muted. We did this to minimize the amount of background noise. And if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, we ask that you use the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm sure at the end, the presenters will be able to get through all of your questions. There are 3 documents that will be referenced during today's presentation. These documents are available for you to download in the pod below the chat. All you have to do is click on each file and then click the download file button, and then the files will be saved to your computer. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that this webinar is being recorded. Okay, that's it for me. I'm now going to pass it off to Raphael Alexander.
Good afternoon, everyone. So glad that you guys could join us. We have some exciting information to share with you today. As Adam said, my name is Raphael Alexander, and I am the Director of Resource and Development for Youth Move National. And in my role, I support system of care communities to find creative solutions to assist the development of authentic youth voice, or also pursue and research just different resources that can really assist with sustaining youth voice in system of care communities. I've been involved with system of care since 2005, and I've served in many capacities at the local level, the state level, and now the national level. And through the years, I've been so grateful for the information that we're excited to share with you. It is through youth-adult partnerships that have really helped me to be in the field so very long, and also to really find some success and walk from being youth-guided to youth-driven.
Awesome. And my name is Johanna Bergen, and I serve as the Interim Executive Director at Youth Move National. And today I'm very excited to share with you the knowledge that we have here of all of the amazing youth engagement work that is happening across the country, both in system of care communities and our Youth Move chapter network. And today we're going to be taking a lot of lessons learned from these 2 networks, and we'll actually have created a platform later during today's webinar for you to hear directly from some of these youth organizations. And we're doing this to frame today's conversation, which is really the movement of moving our youth engagement activities from youth-guided to youth-driven. And so you'll hear from Raphael and I today, and in a little while you'll hear some other voices. I'd like to make sure that we know who you guys are. We want to make sure that today's webinar matches your needs, and to do that, we're going to ask you to utilize some polling questions. So in just a moment, a question is going to appear on your screen, and you will be asked to select the best answer. So you have to pick one from the list. And first, we're going to ask what type of organization you're representing. So Adam, if you can pull up the first polling question for us. So my organization can best be described as, and go ahead and just select one from this list. You're helping your presenters today know who they're talking to and how to craft our message for you. All right, great. And I see that you're seeing the chat screen already. If you're picking other, please go ahead and type the type of organization you represent into the chat box. And the chat box is a place you can ask questions throughout the webinar. Awesome, this looks good. So Adam, let's move on to the second polling question. And this question is going to ask you about your specific role in this organization. And again, you'll have to select just one from the list, so choose the best fit. All right, great. And we'll move on to the third polling question. And this is our last question for you today to help us get to know our audience. And we'd like you to think about your community as a whole when you answer this question. And this is just looking at the three descriptions we provide. Please select the description that's the best match for your community as a whole. The first option, youth and adults are aware and engaged as they explore the ideas and skills of youth leadership and begin to value youth experience as integral to the decision-making process. The next option, youth begin to make recommendations and fill steady, meaningful roles in decision-making bodies. Youth and adults collaborate to create and prioritize goals and develop strategies for positive change. And the third, youth have self-awareness and skills to initiate change, as well as the intrinsic motivation and sense of purpose necessary to follow through. Youth have a mutually respectful relationship with adults and other youth in the community as they partner for the change desired by the youth. Okay, this is cool. So we're looking at the percentages there, and I think that's about exactly what we expected out of today's audience. So Adam, you can go ahead and close these polls, and we'll move ahead with our one thing that is interesting for us when we do polling questions like this is to kind of see the wide variety of places that communities come to us at. And oftentimes, these questions might have been hard to answer because your community might be in different places within different organizations or within different areas of your work. And so it might be a good idea to think about within your community, have we sat down and talked about where we are in how we partner with youth and young adults and how we engage youth and young adults. And so these questions within your leadership team might elicit some pretty interesting responses. So I have those three up here again, and as you hear us talk today, you might be reminded of these three statements, and you'll see as how we're teasing out the differences between youth-guided, youth-directed, and youth-driven through these areas. So very briefly, I'm going to walk you guys through what to expect for today. We really are talking about what we mean by youth-driven, and we hope to be very example-focused for you to help you think concretely about your work in your community and how to implement youth-driven strategies or move into a youth-driven framework. So we did a little bit of introductions already. We're going to briefly cover where the youth movement came from, so we all have a similar starting platform. And we'll remind you of the work that Youth Move National has done to define youth-guided. And then we'll take you through the steps and the continuum of moving from youth-guided to youth-driven. Then the rest of our call is going to be examples. So we'll hear from Youth Move chapters who are navigating right now what it means to be a youth-driven organization. We'll end today's webinar with some next steps. We feel like we have a lot of work at the national level in this area, and we hope that you sort of feel like you have your homework assignment when we get done with the webinar as well. And we would definitely like to make sure that we have time for questions and answers. Our presenters today welcome questions at any time, so if you want to go ahead and whenever you think of something, throw it in the chat box. We might be able to respond to it right away. Otherwise, we'll make sure in wrap-ups that we're able to address any questions that you've asked of us. By the end of today's webinar, we hope that you have an understanding of the youth movement history and how we got to where we are today. We hope that you've remembered what we mean when we say youth-guided and reminded yourself of how that applies to your work in your community. We hope that you understand the purpose of moving to youth-driven programming and services. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to take home examples of what youth-driven programming looks like in communities. And we want you, maybe most importantly, throughout today's webinar, to make some notes and think about what you need to do in your community to move towards a youth-driven approach. And today we will set up the framework in a way that you should be able to identify several next steps and action steps for your community. I'm going to pass the webinar over to Raphael as she covers the first couple topic areas for us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Johanna. So as we look at the history of the youth movement, started several years ago, actually 2003, with the youth movement going from youth advocates and youth coordinators across the country really wanting to get involved nationally, and the National Youth Development Board was formed. And this group was more in an advisory capacity, and then in 2005, System of Care Communities mandated that newly funded communities hire full-time youth coordinators. In 2007, SAMHSA provided startup funding for Youth Move National. And for those who are unaware, just want to make sure you know that MOVE stands for Motivating Others Through Voices of Experience. So fast forwarding just a little bit, in 2008, Youth Move began accepting chapters. In 2013, Youth Move National became an independent organization. Youth engagement requirements growing across programming also grew in 2013, and there was parallel grassroots happening in other systems such as Young People in Recovery. In 2014, Youth Move National experienced additional growth, and we worked with many of you guys many youth engagement specialists and chapters to develop some resources that will come out in 2015 this year, so we're excited about that. Moving along, the purpose of the youth movement. The purpose of youth movement is to unite the voices and causes of youth around the country, to provide a national youth leadership, represent youth voice on national committees, to act as consultants to youth providers and families and other adults, to coach others in authentic youth engagement, to develop the movement through policies and practice, and lastly, to develop training tools, guided, and other documents to assist providers and communities with involving youth at all levels of transformation. And so as we move forward here, actually, Adam, can you pull up the PDF of the ladder? Awesome. Much clearer. So what we have here is a youth involvement ladder, and it starts from youth not being involved in the design or decisions, and which is manipulation, works its way up to adults use youth to promote and support a cause without informing youth. Going further, symbolic representation by few may not have a genuine voice, may be asked to speak for the group they represent, as tokenism. Going up a prong to level 6, assigned and informed youth do not initiate, but understand and have some sense of ownership. Consulted and informed, designed and run by adults who consult with youth. Youth make recommendations that are considered by adults. So let me just pause just a second. And, you know, the youth involvement ladder, it really walks us from the beginning stages of youth involvement. And it really, if we look at it, the beginning stages really correlates, and you'll see as we walk along, as going from youth-guided to youth-directed to youth-driven. As a matter of fact, Johanna is going to share a great analogy a little bit later. And so continuing on, I think we left off at number 4, adult-initiated shared decisions with youth. And that is minimum youth participation, designed and run by adults who share decisions with youth. Third, youth and adult initiated and directed, meaning that programs are designed and run by youth and adults in full partnership. Second, as we go a little bit higher, youth initiated shared decisions with adults. And this is youth programming or even groups that are designed and run by youth who share decisions with adults, and then going up to youth initiated and directed, which is youth groups and programs and projects being designed and run by youth and decisions made by youth. More often than not, a community can find themselves in several stages at one time, or at various stages according to a particular project or a program. I've seen over the years that perhaps young people are only sharing their story at your governance board meeting. However, it might be a different situation when you're with your youth group, who has full autonomy during all youth activities. One thing that may be worthwhile for our listeners on the call is to engage community partners to really obtain some valuable feedback about where you are on the youth involvement ladder. And so I found it really helpful over the years to talk with the social marketer, to talk with the evaluators, to talk specifically in the governance board, and talking specifically with youth engagement specialists on where we fall on the youth involvement ladder. And so I know that that young people will be so happy to hear feedback, and they will also appreciate the support and the input as we promote youth voice and work our way up the ladder to youth driven. All right, so we're going to jump back into the presentation. All right. So the house that youth built. So we've been talking about youth guided. Here's a definition. Youth and adults are aware and engaged as they explore the ideas and skills of youth leadership and begin to value youth experiences as integral to the decision-making process. And again, this walks us on our ladder, our youth involvement ladder. It's really the first part. And during this stage, there's a lot of potential for your community to grow. As we look at an expanded definition, we see that youth-guided means that young people are empowered, they're educated, they're given decision-making abilities within their own lives, and then also within policies and procedures. And perhaps you're wondering, how can youth-guided be practiced? Well, I'm glad you asked. So one of the ways that can be practiced is by helping young people to develop a sustainable voice and to allow young people a safe space to be listened to. Additionally, allowing that on a continuum of power that young people should base their understandings and maturity and strength-based change process. And knowing that this youth-guided, that it's fun and it's worthwhile. So we look at youth-guided through three different lenses. We look at it as from an individual level, a community level, and a policy level. Starting with the individual level, we start first that young people at this level believe that change is possible within themselves, and that there's a safe space where young people are valued and they're spiritually grounded. This really helps to lead young people to develop and practice their leadership skills through programs and trainings. And during this stage, youth-adult partnerships are valued and they are initiated. So as we go further and we look at that community level, community members keep an open-minded view of youth culture. I can't tell you how important just an open-minded view of youth culture is. And as the language shifts, as minds are open to youth culture and language shifts within the community, actions shift as well. And you have young people that are, having a little technical difficulty. So you have young people that, your community is encouraging and listening to the views of young adults that are participating. The community is creating an open and a safe space for young adults. And there's a minimum of at least one young person that's involved. And that, whether it be one young person or a group of young people, those young people are compensated for their expertise. As we move on our last level, policy, as the language shifts and our actions shift as well, as it shifts towards inclusion, youth involvement and policy efforts shift as well. And so in this, you've got training and support to young people is provided before, during, and after meetings. I can't tell you how helpful it has been for a young person as I'm mentoring or bringing young people to the table to meet with them ahead of time and let them know, here's the agenda, here's what's happening, here's what to expect. And even one of the things that I like to do is even have a notepad so that young people who may or may not feel comfortable or may feel a little intimidated can write down whatever their questions are, and we can have a conversation in the room so that they can feel involved. And again, young people are compensated for their expertise. So we're going to move along to youth-directed. Johanna?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Raf. One of the things that you're seeing here is that we're building on a continuum that moves upwards, as you see in the house that you've built. So we're talking you through a growth process that moves us forward in our programming and services, and also in an upward motion as we help young adults gain and build the skill sets that they need to build this house up in layers and levels. And so we've started with our foundation of the youth movement, that there's an understanding and importance of youth involvement. Raphael's walked you through levels of youth-guided participation, and our sort of trick question at the beginning, that polling question, we didn't really give you the opportunity to choose some sort of youth programming that wasn't yet youth-guided. And we made an assumption that today's webinar title meant that we would get people here today who wanted to talk about engaging young people who were at this youth-guided practice level. And here at Youth Move, this is oftentimes where we engage a community. They've understood the value of youth engagement. They're starting to do it. They've got a lot of questions, and they know that they're planning for a future house to be built up in layers. So the other direction that we're talking about is sort of a continuum direction, which is a little bit harder to see on today's webinar slides. But that's a continuum of the past three slides. So the individual level, what a young adult experiences in their own life as they create and maintain wellness on their life journey, right? The second is this community section, and we all will be able to define community a little bit differently. Several of you, as you share where you're from, I see that you're part of a community that has come together to improve behavioral health services for young adults. And all of your partners in that work are your community. And then the third part of the continuum is this policy continuum, this very big overarching umbrella, which is oftentimes intangible. And what we're talking about today is how do we make that policy level very tangible by including and incorporating young adult voice and participation. So if you'll bear with me as we think about building this house upwards and also across this continuum. And then you're going to hear, especially when we get to the examples of today's webinar, you're going to hear that all of this is actually a circle. And that all of us on a daily basis are actually at all levels of the house being youth-guided, directed, and driven, and we're also working in all areas of the continuum, from the individual, the community, to the policy umbrella. So I'm going to walk you really through youth-directed. We find a lot of differentiation between language. Oftentimes people want to shove a youth-led into the house. I'm great with that. Make it a 4-story house. Youth-directed sometimes isn't language you might be familiar with in your community. View this as the stepping stone to get us to youth-driven together. So here we're looking at youth-directed as a place where young adults have begun to make recommendations and to fill meaningful, required roles. They're an expected player at the table. They've been identified as an important partner. And their participation at the table involves helping you make decisions. So there is a power offered to young people that is connected to the advice that they're providing. And at this level, the idea of a youth-adult partnership is so key. So youth and adults are coming together and collaborating to identify the goals, identify where their community, where their organization needs to go, and they are together developing strategies for positive change. So I could probably just say partnership 17 times, and we could skip all of the next slides, right? That's the section that we're at here, this youth-directed level. So really briefly, there is a youth-directed house level, floor of the house that a young adult needs to build, right? So the young adult comes to their individual treatment plan. They're able to do things like identify the supportive adults that need to be at their table to help them maintain their wellness and to live a resilient life. They're practicing and building skills. So there's some relationship here with supportive adults or other peers who are helping them learn how to be a better communicator, learning how to be a self-advocate. At the same time, they have safe space to practice these skills. So this is a lot of growth. There's a lot of back and forth in this section between supportive adults and between young adults. Young adults here, we're really seeing that they have this decision-making ability, right? They can make a decision, and it's at this point in the sort of self-advocacy process that you really learn to understand the implications of your decisions. So there's a lot of conversation about consequences and the domino effect in this area. Young adults are really able to create their plan and maintain wellness by their own actions. And there's a continued desire to learn more and grow. And all of this is in this individual very much thinking about my life as a young adult and what I need to be successful. And I'm also very interested in this stage in being able to define what success looks like for me. And I'm looking for other people on my team and in my community to help me achieve success. In the youth-directed layer of our house, where we also have important work to do in the community, a difference we see in an organization that's operating at a youth-directed level is that they have required positions across all of their work. So this may be in an evaluation team within a service provider that offers an opportunity for young adults who have received services to get their feedback and input into that continuous quality improvement loop. This may be a planning committee who's looking at how to allocate grant funding across the community, indicating that they expect young adults to be on their planning committee. This is a community who is engaging young adults on their advisory board. And what we see is an increased number of young people. So more committees, more boards, more work groups have an expectation for youth voice, right? We also see that all of those groups are realizing that one youth voice isn't enough. There's no way that one young man or young woman can speak for the entirety of your service area, so oftentimes there'll be 2 or 3 slots reserved for a young adult. And we also see that when these young adults come to the table and share their experience, that they also are able to participate in decision making. So that means that if they have a place on a board, that is a voting position. And their voice is an equal vote to those of the other expert professionals that have been brought to that board. We also look in this area for community members to understand and value youth voice and to ask questions like when the young people don't show up, there are people there that are concerned about it that say, hey, what aren't we doing to meet the needs of these young people? How can we be more supportive of their participation in our work? It's great to be in a meeting when someone stops the meeting and says, hey, we haven't heard from anybody under the age of 25 yet. What are we doing? Let's pause and make sure there's space in our conversation for this youth voice. And there we're really seeing community members valuing the place of youth at the table. And then if we think about youth-directed in the policy level, so this is the big intangible umbrella, we're talking about a community and organizations and supportive adults who have helped young adults learn what they need to know to affect policy. So how do we understand the policies that affect us, what policies affect us, how do policies affect us? There's a lot of training and development that happen in a youth-directed community to help young adults realize that their voice is very important in creating effective policy changes. And depending on what type of organization you're in and where you're working, you might think about policy at your organizational level. You might think about policy at your county or state level, and there's a lot of different places that policies might come in. But we're really looking in a youth-directed community for young adults who understand that they have the power to create change here. And sometimes that means as supportive adults or as an organization that's being supportive of youth engagement, we have to make the intentional space for policymakers to pause and be able to hear from young adults. So the partnership that happens between supportive adults, organizations that are youth-directed, and the young adults themselves is really important to see progress in this area. And then we're coming back reminding you that our house is still being built, right? So there's another level, and that's what we really are going to hone in on for the rest of today's webinar, and that's the idea of youth-driven. So we might be talking about youth-driven services, youth-driven programming, youth-driven organizations. There's a lot of places where we, all of us on the call here, have an opportunity to think about where in our work do we allow young adults to be the drivers of what we're doing, right? So at this level, we're seeing that youth have self-awareness and they have gained and built the skills needed to initiate change, as well as intrinsic motivation, meaning that they understand the value of creating change. And they also have a sense of purpose, oftentimes as a group, necessary to follow through, to share their experiences in a way that creates the change that they desire. Youth have a mutually respectful relationship with adults and other youth in the community. So really seeing a whole platform of partnerships that are based on, have an equitable base here at the youth-driven level of programming. And we see that supportive adults and organizations view youth as equal and important partners to create the change. And that we've actually paused and made sure that young adults were the ones who chose and were able to work through the process of identifying what change was needed, right? So all of this comes into play at youth-driven. And I'll just pause again because we've talked about this so much at Youth Move National, that this is not an ever-growing house, right? We're not heading for a skyscraper. We're looking for opportunities for young adults to participate at the guided, directed, and driven level based on their ability, and that there is a flow for them to follow. At the same time, young adults may find themselves at different parts of the house at different times. And so it would be totally reasonable for a young adult to identify that in some ways they are able to participate in youth-driven programming. At other times, in the same program, the same location, they may act and be in a youth-directed role. And at the same time, they might be youth-guided in another place. So even here at Youth Move National in our programming, there are times when we move up and down and in between these floors of the house. So in youth-driven programming at the individual level, the really concrete example of this is a young adult who has a team of supportive people who have let this young person create their vision, their goal for the future. So the young adult has been able to define what success is for them. They've been able to set their goals. They may be education goals. They may be social goals. They may be housing goals. Whatever the goals are, the young adults have identified them. And then they've created a team of people that are going to help them meet their goals. This is not a picture of a young adult who has said goodbye to everyone, walked out a door, and said, I can do it by myself, right? So there's still such an important role of partnership and caring relationships in youth-driven activities on the individual level. But what is really important, that young adults are offered the opportunity to select and identify who is most beneficial to help them reach their goals. And as many of us probably have experienced either as a young adult sort of voicing our independence or as a supportive adult trying to support young adults, we change our mind a lot about who we need in our circle supporting us. And so that sort of developmental appropriateness of what young adults want is really key to having everybody on the same page here. We're looking at youth-driven. A young adult has learned how to express themselves, to articulate their needs. They've learned the system. They've learned the resources that are available in their community. They're able to ask and say, hey, I think that would help me, right? Oftentimes, sort of at the bottom here, there's a bunch of options for young adults here. Lots of times young adults may identify that they want to support their friends, their peers, in their own journeys in this youth-driven phase. Oftentimes we see young adults using the power of their voice and experience to train other young adults. And there's a lot, we hear a lot about young people saying that this helping ourselves by helping others message is really vital to their individual success within a youth-driven peer programming sort of environment that we may hear a little bit more about this afternoon. Of course, we can take all the youth-driven principles and apply them in a community setting. Here we're looking at a community that just screams support of young adults. There is expectation in all places that youth voice is part of our decision-making process. When we look across our community, there are multiple safe places where young adults want to go, want to be, because they know that they are heard and their voice is valued when they show up there. We see an infusion of youth voice in compensated paid positions. Communities oftentimes who are talking about youth-driven programming are looking into peer services, are looking into facilitated youth programming. We see organizations hiring for lived experience. So we've taken something that might have felt like a negative experience to young adults and flipped it on their head and said, actually what we need in our services, we need young adults who have these lived experiences. And we're going to be offering better opportunities for all our young people by listening to these voices of experience. In a youth-driven community, we would see lots of young adults offering training. I just, over this past weekend, one of our chapters offered a regional leadership summit, and one of the things they did was they had young adults train adults on youth culture. And I love that flip of saying, who's the expert? Who has the information we need to do better? And in this situation, it was the young people, and they really needed to have the opportunity to share with their adult community members who were going to be their partners what it really was to experience and live in youth culture today. And then, of course, because each level is the same, youth-driven policies and approaches can be seen on the policy level. Here you might see a difference in reserving a spot for a young adult on a council. Here you might see young people calling a meeting, inviting partners to their space, saying, hey, we've identified some needs in our community, and we need your help tackling them. Here we see lots more young adults going out into the community, telling their community and their policymakers what they need. If we talk about what type of young person is doing this activity, they've had self-advocacy training, they've worked with peers, they worked as a group to accomplish their goals. And we really see young adults who have the skill set and have the knowledge they need. They're equipped to make the change and to drive the change. We look here for the young adults to be the ones that are holding everyone accountable to the change they want to see. I think this is also really interesting and came from conversations among young people. This last bullet here, young adults can access the support they need to take the lead and make the change. So young adults can say, this is where we want to go, here's our vision. Oh, look at this, we need support. We can't get there on our own. But they have been built up through the training, through their experience, to be able to look in their community and turn around to you and say, you know what? I need your help to get us where we want to go. And so we want young adults who can identify when they need support, can identify how to find resources in their community, and who have learned how to be effective communicators to ask for the help that they need. And this is just a really exciting place to think about young adults being all across the country. And I hope you could hear me smiling about this work, because this is a long process, and many of you might be saying, wow, we have young adults in all of these levels in our community, and that's really cool. So I don't forget, I want to reference one of the handouts in the file, and it's the one, it's YA to AY, which is Youth Advocate to Advocate for Youth. The individual level of this change between guided, directed, and driven on the individual level is in a way fleshed out in that guide. And we've provided you with the one-pager in the handout. You can get the full guide on our website. And for me, it really comes back to my experience being able to share my voice and how I grew as an individual, and building my capacity allowed me to build my capacity to create change for the larger peer group that I was working with. And there was important parts along this entire journey as the house builds up, as the layers circle around, and as you experience all of these different levels. So what's really exciting for me today is to turn the webinar over to individuals who do this work every day on a community level. And I am really excited. We provided 2 of our chapter leads with a zoo of questions to get at the idea of what type of programming do you offer via your Youth Move chapter, and to really think about where in their programming are they youth-driven. And there were some good notes going back and forth about the challenges in identifying this, and this sort of idea of, wow, well, we aren't 100% youth-driven. And that's okay. So Lydia and Matt, who you're going to hear from, maybe don't know that that's why they're selected to share, but we're intrigued about the different types of programs that they offer. So today, first we're going to hear a little bit from Lydia, who is coming to us from Youth Move, Massachusetts. And we're going to have Lydia introduce Youth Move Massachusetts, a little bit about their programming, and then start to dive into this idea of what does youth-driven really look like in her community. So Lydia, I'm going to pass it over to you right now.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm coming from Youth Move Massachusetts. I am the Youth Program Manager here. And Youth Move Massachusetts is currently a program of the Parent Professional Advocacy League, or PAL. And PAL is an independent, family-driven organization for children's mental health, and is also a chapter of the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. So I'm coming from a program of a nonprofit. So we're not an independent organization. I would like to say yet. We're not an independent organization yet. And we currently, I like to say, hover around step 3 of the ladder that you saw earlier, which is on design and run by youth and young and adults in partnership. Because PAL is family driven, the agency, we understand as an agency the value of authentic involvement of youth. And so as Johanna was just saying, different pieces of our programming may be at different levels, including we offer a youth group, a young adult group, a speakers bureau, and we also offer something called strategic sharing, which is a training that was written by the Foster Care Alumni of America. And currently, Youth Move Massachusetts is the only group of young people in the country licensed to teach strategic sharing, which is a very exciting component of what we offer here. Moving through that, we are a youth-driven organization in that, for example, our strategic sharing team is a group of young adult members. They are trained as facilitators. They meet ongoing to discuss their programming goals, their professional development, their funding, their marketing, all of the pieces around strategic sharing, the specific piece of our programming, including the cost, who we're going to offer it to, how we train new facilitators. They're all conversations that were initiated by these peer facilitators, and those conversations have been brought to PAL staff, our board, in order to be supported and, developed further. Johanna, is that a good place to start, or should I keep going? I know we're pressed for time.
No, you have time, Lydia, so okay. That is a good introduction, yeah. And in my head, I'm trying to capture a picture of all of your levels. So you might want to talk a little bit about youth voice at your board level, your peers that you're talking about, so we understand how that voice flows.
Absolutely. So our programming is open to youth 13 and up, and while we receive funding from our Department of Mental Health, we are not strictly a mental health agency, and so youth from all backgrounds and lived experiences can come to Youth Move Massachusetts, which is probably one of my favorite things about being a part of this organization. So we have a youth group which meets weekly, and this youth group is entirely run by the members. So they are deciding the agenda, they are deciding where they meet, if they want to take a trip to the State House or go on and go out and do an activity or promote an event. They are the ones conducting all the research, putting together the plans, but also supporting one another on a week-to-week basis. So it kind of provides this dual piece of event planning and awareness raising, but also just peer-to-peer support. The group is non-clinical, and I am there as a support person, but I like to joke and say 80% of my job is ordering pizza. So I do support the process, but I am not the one in charge. Similar to our young adult group, which is for young adults 17 and up, it is run by our 2 peer support specialists, and that one I don't even attend the meetings. So they really are in charge of who's coming in as guest speakers, what skills are they developing, what are their needs, and what would they like to be doing in the community, what committees, what tables do they want to be at, where do they see the need in our community, and where do they want to be, and my job is to help facilitate getting them there, facilitate the skills, facilitate the discussions, and really support their intentions. And lastly, we offer the Speakers Bureau, which meets twice a month, and that is run by 2 of the young adult members. So again, I'm ordering pizza, and I'm helping to promote their group and what they're doing, but I am not the one making decisions about where are they going to talk, are they going to speak on specific topics or not, what skills do they need. If I receive a request from an organization who would like a panel presentation, I don't get to say yes or no. It has to go through the Speakers Bureau meeting first, and they decide where they are bringing their voice and how they are going to be represented and how they're going to be compensated. I know, Johanna, you were talking about compensating youth for their expertise, and we believe very much in that as well. Our youth have gone on to produce different materials such as tip sheets and blogs. They've been published as far away as California, which is really cool to see. They've spoken at many, many, many different venues, including the Georgetown Training Institute, the Federation's Conference, Mass School of Professional Psychology, UMass Medical School, on their expertise, their lived experience. We host a youth track at our annual conference every year, which is open to youth and young adults from Massachusetts, but also we've had folks from Youth Move New Hampshire have come down and come together for a day of talking and conversation and dialogue around what are our next steps in our communities. How are we going to further this change, keep the momentum going, and have a good time while we're doing it. We've had a couple different anti-stigma campaigns go out, which were really cool and very creative, which is one of my favorite things about working within a youth-driven, youth-guided organization is that just the creativity is astounding. We had Stigma is the Real Monster over Halloween, And we offer, we do Letting Go of Stigma every year, which is a balloon release event to kick off the month of May, Children's Mental Health Month. A lot of the needs of our community revolve around internship and professional development. So we've offered an internship program here, which at the beginning of the season, I ask, what are the skills you need to learn? And then we brainstorm, where can we get people to come in and teach? What kind of curriculum do you want me to see if I can get my hands on? And then the young adults and myself actually teach it. So it's again driven by what they see the need. What are their needs in the community? How can they get the job they're looking for? What can further their programming? And lastly, I just want to touch on our youth advisory group, which just turned 1 year old, which is really exciting for us. And it's the group that gets together 6 times a year, once every other month, to talk about our accomplishments, our challenges, and where we want to go and how we're going to solve those problems. And that group, as I was told by our youth members, has to be at least 51% youth at every meeting. So we can invite adults. We're going to invite adult community partners, PAL staff, PAL board members to come in and offer their expertise and offer their experiences. But when it boils down to it, youth hold the decision-making power. And so within that group makes a lot of decisions revolving around programming. We partner very closely with the PAL staff and PAL board when it comes to finances in particular. But the YAG has a lot of control over what they want to see happen next and how they want to see that happen, which is really cool.
Awesome, Lydia. So I wanted to ask you about one more thing, and then we'll hear from Matt and have a little bit more question and answer.
Absolutely.
But I'm intrigued about the summer programming, the internship programming you were talking about.
Yeah.
And if you would talk a little bit about you so cheerfully said that young adults define the training, identify the training that they look for, and then you go out and find how you're actually going to do that. How are you going to get the young people the knowledge that they want? Is it really that easy? What does that process look like for young adults to identify their needs?
It is not that easy, perhaps, but it is a very exciting process to see happen, especially for some youth and young adults who join us who are not really too sure about this whole youth-driven thing. So what happens is we get together, we have this conversation, and a lot of times the skills are, I have no idea how to look for a job. I have no idea how to behave in an office. I have no idea when to disclose my mental health needs, when not to, at what point during the interview process, or do I have to wait till I have the job. Communication skills are a big piece. And so what happens is our 2 peer support specialists, we have 2 other young adults on staff, one 10 hours and one 19 hours a week. And together, us 3, we come up with, the different folks in the community who are connected to who could support us in teaching these skills. So a lot of collaboration on our part with the local community colleges and other youth-serving or youth-driven organizations in Massachusetts. We come up with the space we're going to use. Can we get food donated? All these things that will get people in the door. In the past, we have been able to stipend youth for attending the internship program, which is typically half training, half this professional development component of stuff they want to learn, and then half actually working for PAL and providing services and doing a lot of office work for us here. So on-the-job experience plus the training component. And it's very interactive. It can change as things go. If folks, at the beginning of the season tell me that they really want XYZ for a skill and, ABC turns out to be more important, we will move in that direction. It's very much based around what the participants are looking for that summer. It has never been the same twice. Flexibility is a huge need when offering this program. And funding is a big one, being able to compensate youth for being in the room because they are not giving up, they are attending and they are using their time and they are putting in a lot of effort. And I think we can all agree that being compensated for your hard work is very important. So absolutely. Does that answer that question?
Great. Yeah, you did. Yep. So thank you so much, Lydia, for sharing a little bit about what's happening at Youth Move Massachusetts. And I encourage everybody who's listening, if you have questions for Lydia or for anything we talked about, go ahead and use that chat screen and feel free to let us know your questions. And we're going to turn this over to Matt, who's coming to us today from Youth Move Maine. And we're interested in finding out a little bit about the overview of programming offering in Maine, and then some insight into this idea of when and where our programming looks youth-driven and the Matt's experience working with young adults in these approaches. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Johanna. Hey, everybody. So just to kind of give an overview about Youth Move Maine in general, so we're a statewide organization. I manage the statewide programming and oversee our 3 regions. So we're northern, mid, and southern Maine. And each of the regions, we have program coordinators that kind of do on-the-ground local work with young people. And we kind of look at each region individually. We all come together to kind of come up with some program ideas and think about sort of the organizational needs, but really looking at conducting focus groups is sort of how we started. We kind of went through a big transition this summer when I started, and so we started from the ground up, kind of asking young people what kind of things in the area are you looking for in the community? How do you want to be engaged? What kind of things would you come to? What would be fun? What would be engaging to be doing? So in northern Maine, we're doing a lot of anti-bullying things. Some of our partners up there are the homeless shelter as well as the youth detention facility, which is a nice way to say youth prison. So we've done a lot of, right now we're doing a zine workshop there, kind of doing youth voice, kind of getting their experiences with whether it's homelessness or the juvenile justice system or whatever it is, kind of what their experiences are, and then we'll kind of go through a process of distributing that, sort of thinking about policy change and those things, having young people go. We have, every year we have a state Hall of Flags meeting in Augusta, so bringing our projects and the things that we're working with and letting young people talk to the representatives in their local communities to kind of talk about, you know, what the needs that they see are. So in mid-Maine, there's a lot of juvenile justice work happening there, a lot of sort of racial bias. There's a big Somali population in Lewiston, Maine. So our regional coordinator, Jerome, works a lot with that population. They've recently done a walk for equality, which was completely coordinated by young people in the community with a couple of partners, thinking about sort of, again, community, youth-driven. A lot of young people from each of the different programs that we partner with in that region came together to kind of, you know, make banners and do things for that specific event. And then in southern Maine, we're working a lot inside of the youth detention facility down here as well as our regional coordinator down here is doing some teen pregnancy groups with young girls who are either pregnant or have small children and doing parenting skills and those kinds of things. So that's sort of a general structure, and then those programs are funded through our state block grant, and then we also have a state grant through the Department of Corrections specifically for a youth peer partnership program that we call. So that program pairs young people with lived experience that we hire and go through a training process for intentional peer support, as well as some specific youth training, because our state intentional peer support is not youth-informed whatsoever. So we had an additional day in for training to just talk about some of those things that are sort of youth-specific needs, whether it's, you know, just language or thinking about how to engage and what mutuality might look like, since we're not a clinical provider. So one of the important parts of that is one-on-one interactions and then connecting them to other things in the community as well. And that program the training and everything is pretty set in stone, but the young people that we hire, it's very much is youth-driven in the sense that they come and they're supervised, but the way in which they're working with young people is very individualized and sort of personal. So in that way, and then there's co-reflection, so the supervision structure happens one-on-one with their supervisor, but also with each other to kind of talk about what are some of the struggles going on with young people that we're working with and whatnot. And then there's a couple statewide programs that we have, one being a social media journalism internship where young people are basically, if you go to our website, youthmovemaine.org, we have an entire section on there that's just completely run by young people. So they're writing blogs, and we're hoping to expand it to other types of media, so podcasts or videos or whatever. But they're just writing about sort of topics that are important to them. They've written about holiday traditions. They've written about domestic abuse. They've written about LGBT issues. So it really varies in the gamut. And so they peer edit all of their materials, and then it goes up, and then it kind of spaces out to our Facebook and our Twitter, and that's all generated by them, which is really cool, because I think one of the thoughts was that our web space should also, our virtual spaces for Youth Move should also have that youth-guided, youth-driven kind of approach to it. And then the other thing that we have is, which we just started, we just sort of took off the ground 2 weekends ago, is our advisory council, which we've been kind of putting together for a while. So we have youth from each region of the state that kind of reflect those different programming areas that we're working throughout. And right now in the first year, we're kind of using it as just sort of team building, insight building, kind of getting how are we going to make decisions, and then giving everybody sort of their own roles and letting them sort of facilitate and run a meeting. So at the end of last meeting, we kind of said, okay, this young person, well, they decided, but who would be responsible for coming up with the agenda, and who would be responsible for kind of getting a space and things like that. And obviously each of the regional coordinators are there to help support young people in those endeavors. But really, that's probably the closest work in that program. Because a lot of the other programs, regional coordinators are getting information from youth, and the programs are coming from youth, but we're kind of helping facilitate those. So this is really something that we're creating in order to make all of our other programs be sort of more youth-driven. So I think that's pretty much the overview, if that sounds good.
All right, and I will say that today a requirement to be a presenter on today's webinar was not that you are the fastest talker ever, although we seem to have found two of you, and coupled with me, so I apologize. So Matt, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and then I have some questions for both of you. Matt, you're talking a lot about layers, and specifically I'm interested in your regional coordinators in your programs. Do you have requirements or definitions of what it means to hire a youth for those positions?
Yeah, so youth are, for the coordinator positions, there's not specifically an age. For our youth support partners in our peer program, those are young people who are 18 to 25. And then for regional coordinators, it's not so much, but all of our regional coordinators are under 25 as well. They're between like 22 and 25. And then lived experience is part of, and anybody who works in our organization lived experience as part of sort of that. That's something we ask in interviews, sort of like how can you empathize and kind of speak with this work, and how is it important to you, and what does it mean to you to be part of this work?
Gotcha, Matt. So that's part of a self-disclosure of lived experience is part of your interview process for all of your positions.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like self-disclosure. It has to be, it's more about being able to articulate and sort of empathize with others. It's not like we say, there is a point where, like, if you're comfortable, you know, would you mind sharing, like, what kind of brings you an interest to you about this? And, I mean, most people are usually very good about, you know, like, strategically sharing their stories, and that's how we kind of are able to gauge that they would be good in sort of a coordinator position, being able to strategically share as part of their position as well.
Awesome. So I learned something every day here at Youth Move National, and it's interesting to hear you phrase those interview questions, because I still remember the first time I was in an interview with a local system of care, asked that question in a much less eloquent way. And I felt like I needed some support in answering that question. And I know that's something that we get a lot here at Youth Move as we hire young adults, what are best practices in that area. So thanks for sharing that language, Matt. Yeah. So Lydia and Matt, you can decide who goes first. Here's the question of the day. Is all of your work across all of these different types of programming that you've described today youth-driven?
Did you ask, is it all youth-driven?
Yes.
Matt, would you like me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Overall, is it all youth-driven? I would say more yes than no. Is that fair? Only because if it's not youth-driven, we're not going to have youth and young adults to participate in it. So in a way, if we were brought a project and said you have to do this X, Y, Z, it's mandatory. I don't think it would be a very successful project. And I think the enthusiasm and the success of our chapter so far is very much contingent on the fact that the youth here have a lot of agency to choose which projects and which endeavors they pursue and how they're going to pursue them. 100% no, because there's always room for growth. I think very much right now we're in a place of transition. We are looking at these next steps. We are trying to identify ways to make our youth voice and make it more sustainable and make it more permanent within the organization, I think might be a good word. So I want to say more yes than no, but there's definitely a lot of room for growth, and we're excited to move towards that.
Awesome. Thanks, Lydia.
And then for us, I would say that the only thing that I can think of that, because even like our advisory council and our social media internship, like we sort of came up with the first agenda, and then from there kind of they guided what trainings would happen next. Like if they were interested in podcasting, then we'll do podcasting. So the initiation of some of the programs are not 100% youth driven, but all of our programs have come from focus groups of young people in the community. So it's at least young people informing for each of those communities what would be worthwhile for them. And then I remember back when I was a regional coordinator in Bangor, in the northern region of Maine, I had done some focus groups at the homeless shelter, and then now we have a really strong partnership with them. So those original programs we did may have been some of the ideas that we had floating around, and thinking also that regional coordinators are essentially young people as well, and they're coming up with some of those things. But as far as participants are concerned, then that kind of flows into, okay, we did this one program, and then at the end that kind of got us in the door of partnering with those young people and then saying, what do you want to do next? So I know they had mentioned like making a documentary film. So we have a bunch of camera equipment and stuff that we've gotten since then. So we're going to start sort of facilitating some of that and then seeing what they want to do with it. So I'd say it's like you were saying before, how it kind of, sometimes you're in this place and not even at the same time. I'd say sometimes we start off as youth guided, and then in each of the programs try to move towards youth driven as much as possible.
Awesome. You guys did great answering the trick question, both of you. So, Matt, you're getting at my second question that I had for both of you, and it comes from this sense that both of you are sharing that you do so much, that your Youth Move chapters are doing so many, I wrote layers of programming. And Raphael's quiet here. Sometimes we put her on the microphone to talk about how to prioritize all of the things that you could do and think about how to sustain your key activities. But we're hearing from both of you that you are sustaining large amounts of diverse programming. And so I was curious about how you came about to be operating so many things. And Matt, you already started answering that question in a great way with the focus groups, with hiring young adults who are then drivers of the program. I wonder if you wanted to add anything to that, or if Lydia, you wanted to hop in about how you came about to have all these different types of programming.
Sure, I guess I can just kind of continue. That's cool. So yeah, I mean, like I had said, we sort of went through some transitions this past summer. Before that, we were doing a peer support group and a leadership group, and attendance wasn't the greatest. So when I had taken over in this position, part of it was hiring a whole new staff. So a piece of that is all of our regional coordinators used to be in our peer support program as mentors. So that was a really easy transition and really great in a way because they kind of understood the work, understood where they were coming from in the work, and I think really solidified a team, which I think that cohesiveness really helped. And from there, we had just kind of come up with okay, doing those focus groups in the local areas are starting from baseline and kind of saying, what are the needs of each area? And then we kind of came up and said, here's some workshops, like here's a bullying workshop, and then doing that and then getting feedback about what that looks like. Is it working? Is it something that young people really want to engage in? And it was. So like in Northern Maine, Sayre's still doing bullying workshops in the community. So really asking young people what they want to see in the community, and some of that is even like we brought young people to a ropes course just to do some team building and things like that. And so they were really looking to connect with other young people throughout the state more, which kind of prompted us doing the social media because that's a statewide program where everybody comes together for trainings and kind of talks about social justice issues and what they can be writing about and doing some brainstorming, and same thing with the advisory council, which is why we kind of had a shared decision that the first year would just sort of be the getting to know each other, establishing what the group norms are and doing those kinds of things, and then really solidifying in the second year a little bit more about sort of the formal pieces of what the advisory council should and will be.
Awesome. And then Lydia, would you mind speaking just for a moment about how your different types of programming came about?
Absolutely. So I think largely our programming grows with our members' lived experience. So 10 years ago, when we had one youth group called The Others, membership was almost exclusively youth with pretty significant mental health needs. So the group had a very heavy mental health focus, which isn't a bad thing by any means, but that's what the experience the youth members were bringing to the group, so that's where they focused their efforts. As more and more youth and young adults joined through word of mouth or different types of referrals and things, and different youth and different young adults with different backgrounds, different needs, different passions came, our work expanded. So I tried very hard to bring in youth with that specific lived experience, that specific passion to support a project in their area of choice. One example would be a young adult who worked very closely with us for a few years, was very passionate about anti-bullying and was really had a lot of lived experience with bullying in school and had a lot of challenges surrounding that. And so she went after a couple different grants and was awarded one, and she brought together a team of youth and young adults to develop an anti-bullying workshop that then went to public schools ultimately throughout Worcester to teach on this subject. And it was generated by this one young adult and supported certainly by our youth programming, which was really great to see. Another piece would be youth who are in intensive residential treatment programs. A lot of families are wondering why youth who are in intensive residential treatment programs weren't involved in a lot of community programs. And so with our youth groups, we actually have membership from 2 local locked units at the highest level of care in Massachusetts. And their youth come out and they are regular members of our youth group. They walk in the door, their staff sit out in our waiting area down the hall, and they participate just like any other youth. They participate in our youth advisory group and strategic sharing, in training and professional development in our internship program. They design projects, they design tip sheets, they can take on leadership roles. So that's another example of one way that the experiences of our members informs the work that we do and what direction it's going to take.
Thank you. Awesome. So I've really enjoyed listening both to Lydia and Matt and been teasing out all sorts of different ideas and ways to look at your programming in your community to look at it in a similar lens as Matt and Lydia shared about what areas of our programming are youth-driven. How do we decide and determine what type of programming and services do we offer? How does it change over time? And I think all of this comes back to the idea of listening to youth voice and how we include youth voice across our work. I just want to offer officially on the record, if you have any additional questions for any of us that have been speaking on the webinar, the chat box is available for your use, and we would welcome your questions. I want to make sure that I can cover a bit of next steps for us here at Youth Move National in terms of addressing youth-driven approaches. And I also want to give you guys a chance to type quickly. So as I see folks starting talking, I think we'll just do questions if you guys are okay with that, Matt and Lydia, and I'll save about 5 minutes for next step. So I'm seeing a question here from Lisa. Can anyone give any specific examples of what exactly youth do? Lisa, that's a really great question. Lydia or Matt, do you want to think more about your general young adult membership and what their experience with your chapter is?
Sure. As far as like membership is concerned, that's actually something that we're kind of, because we have all these different programs, and lately as a staff we've been thinking about how to sort of solidify that and kind of, I don't know, give a little bit more buy-in, and so we're coming up with sort of more membership. So that's something that the advisory council is going to kind of think about. So as far as what exactly you do, like in each of the programs, it looks a little bit differently. In the advisory council, that's really where young people are helping us make decisions about our programming, about sort of things that are going to happen in their local communities, getting to know other young people throughout the state and sharing their experiences. That was sort of how we spent our meeting a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of just sort of sharing and kind of getting to know each other. So that like sort of peer-to-peer connection is really important for young people. And then using that as a platform to then make decisions. Youth of Maine is also one of the sponsors of the statewide youth alliance that has recently started, where young people are sort of reviewing policy, and it's still a fairly new collaborative that has been started. So there's 2 Youth Move Maine members who are going to be sort of looking over policy and reviewing, making recommendations. And we bring young people to a couple of our different service delivery meetings too, where we kind of give them an overview of what the meeting is about. So they're in those meetings giving their feedback. For example, one of those is a juvenile justice initiative, and so we have young people with lived experience that have been inside the facility that are helping formulate some of the policies and the service deliveries that we're providing to young people who are incarcerated. So these are young people who've been in and are kind of saying, this is what didn't work for me, this is what worked, and doing also focus groups. So informing is a big part of it. Then there's just sort of more recreational programs. There's like the social media program where young people are blogging and actually just doing, you know, sort of like whatever they're writing, giving their expression, their thoughts and opinions on different things. So a lot of it is peer-to-peer connection and sort of informing others in the community about their experiences is what I would say are 2 of the biggest things that youth are specifically doing.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Lydia, do you want to address the same question in terms of, what does it really look like or feel like to be a young person at Youth Move Mass?
Absolutely. So I think, like Matt had said, depending on the area of the program, it's going to be a little bit different. With our internship program, like I had mentioned before, they're either actually participating in trainings on conflict resolution on different topics that will help them in the workforce. They're also supporting our office needs, faxing outreach materials. They're doing a lot of material development. Our youth interns are actually the ones who drafted job descriptions, so to speak, for our lead youth advocates and peer support specialists. So the fact that we have peer support specialists on staff, the initial ideas about what their job should entail came from our youth members. We work on various grants in conjunction with different youth serving or youth-driven organizations, as well as folks like SAMHSA or MSPCC. Currently, we're working on a grant called Expert Screening, Brief Intervention, and Referral for Treatment, and we are running youth focus groups that will inform the improvement and implementation of SBIRT in Massachusetts schools and communities. For Mental Health Month, the youth plan their own youth track on the Letting Go of Stigma campaign event. They plan open mics for mental health awareness. This is a lot of meeting and making phone calls and collaborating with one another to get these events off the ground in order to raise awareness around youth issues. They are teaching and training folks in the community. They are participating on panels, presenting workshops on various topics surrounding youth and young adult voice and choice. We've trained residential staff. We've taught social work students. They've spoken to psychiatry students about youth voice and choice in mental health care and in residential settings, and what works and what doesn't work, and how maybe staff and youth can work together more. And I see someone had asked about like what kind of community activities. you can get really creative with this. You can be really, really, really creative. We table at any school event, mental health event, awareness, anywhere we can talk to folks about mental health and why it's important that youth are involved in this discussion. We recently participated in a 3-day horror convention. It was like Worcester's Horror and Metal Music Festival, and we tabled, and we actually had a really great time talking to folks who may not be your first thought, like who should we go talk to about children's mental health? And we got really great positive feedback and a lot of media coverage on our mission and what we're doing in the community. So yeah, we're sort of all over the place, and it varies depending on the area you're in, but it's a lot of fun. We're doing a lot.
Yeah, and for those of you on the phone, I mean, we're hearing from 2 programs that have a lot of experience engaging young adults, and they've maybe shared more than they realized about their growth and about their process, and that they just didn't start doing all of this overnight. It's been a slow growth of young adults participating, having a really wide, diverse background that brought different interests to the table, and creating the space to respond to the young adults to see what they want to do. Every time I sit down with a group of young people, I'm always amazed about where we end up at the end of the conversation. Even a lot of my interaction ends up being sort of stifled to national events where the young people don't know each other until they walked into the room, and then we're trying to have a conversation. But even those conversations get so rich and so meaningful so quickly, and all we do is say, here's a space we hope you feel safe in, and we're going to follow your lead. I hear briefly one question specifically about involving your youth programming with Youth Move. Youth Move is a membership chapter affiliation group. So youth groups, we look for the group to make a decision, the young people to make a decision that uniting their work with a national organization is beneficial and something that they want to do. And then we have an application process which is meant to tease out the work and the goals and the vision of the particular youth group you're supporting. And the application process is meant to be completed by young adults within the group itself, and you can find more information about that on our website. And then the last question I see typed here from Brandon is looking for tips on recruitment of young people and establishing buy-in. Lydia mentioned something that I thought was so cool, and I will word it not as well, but when you were responding to is our programming youth driven, you said, well, if it wasn't driven by the young people, they wouldn't come. And I think that's so true. So one place we always suggest is to look internally and think about what do you have within your youth group. The young people at the table, ask them, how do we get your peers to come? How do we grow our work? And oftentimes that peer-to-peer connection and invitation is one of the first and most effective recruitment strategies. And the establishing buy-in, I would speak to creating safe space for authentically listening to youth voice as the number one place to build a trusting relationship, which is really the basis of that buy-in you're looking for. Matt or Lydia, if we take this as a almost final question, do you have any other recruitment tips for Brandon?
Well, like I was just saying, we have a variety of different programs that are pretty well populated. Like our peer support program, we're at maximum capacity right now, and we're definitely looking at some of the groups that we're running in different communities. We're looking at how to sort of sustain those, but then also how to get young people to sort of our in-house programming, so sort of thinking about that membership. Because really when we sort of started at ground zero this summer, one of the things was like, okay, so we don't have a huge base of young people that we're working with. So we then went out and sort of ventured partnerships with other organizations that we had been working with. So homeless shelters, mental health agencies, and kind of provided, okay, we have these trainings and we have these workshops, and started creating connections with young people that way just to establish a rapport and who we were. And that's been really great. And I would say that we're sort of at the point now where we have enough young people that kind of know about us that we can start phasing in sort of a membership. So having our advisory council help us, what's that structure? What does it look like? What does being a member of Youth Move Maine really look like? You know, sort of so we can use them as a sounding board, but then they can also, you know, attend programs or, you know, be on email lists and kind of be connected to our regional coordinators, but then also some of the state work that we're doing. So we're sort of in that place where we've sort of built the connection, and now sort of the recruitment, quote unquote, can kind of start happening, I think, easier because we've established good connections in the community with everybody. So I think that's really essential for step one, is to create those.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just really pleased with all of the information we've been able to share today, and I'm so grateful for everyone who joined us. And I hope you found a nugget of something to take home with you. I want to speak very briefly just to this idea that Youth Move National really feels like we are at the beginning of a process of defining what a youth-driven approach means. And Raphael shared at the beginning of the webinar, good thing there's not a test, right, because we might not remember it. She shared the definition of youth-guided, and that was actually created by young adults who were the advisory council who formed what is now Youth Move National. And one of their earliest pieces of work was to define what youth-guided meant. And that definition is now used across several different SAMHSA grant programs that require youth engagement. And we're really excited about that. I think we're more excited about this next phase, which is really pushing the engagement of young adults to another level. And so we really see some action steps on our end, which we are very excited and happy to be sharing with you. So if you found out about this webinar, there's a good chance in a similar way you're going to find out about how to participate in sharing your voice and your impact in this national discussion we're having to develop, as an end result, a youth-driven definition that we can then all use in our community work. So our next steps include finding multiple creative ways to capture your input into that process. And the next steps that we really see for everyone else on the phone call is to do a little bit of homework, is to sit back and think about the programming you're doing right now, and where can this programming begin to move to youth-driven, and what are your next steps to do this? And as you think about that, you'll think about all of the partners that need to be part of creating a community that's ready to engage and support young adults, and to think about all of the really important layers. Remember, we build our house up floor by floor, youth-guided, directed, and driven, oftentimes all simultaneously. And at the same time, we're sort of wrapping through our continuum, supporting young adults individually on their individual goals, supporting our communities being safe and effective places for young adults to live successful lives. And then to wrap around all of our individual work and our relationship work with policies that support young adults living successful lives. And with that mighty mission and way too big homework assignment, I say thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to connecting with you in any number of virtual platforms. We're probably where you are, so check us out. And if you have additional questions, feel free to contact Raphael or I, and we hope that you took advantage of downloading some of the files we provided today. And we look forward to engaging in a continued conversation about what youth-driven youth engagement looks like. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.